On the last call, we talked about sales leadership and the definitions of the above, and sales being managing your emotions and the emotions of others, and leadership being managing your emotions and the emotions of others through change, right? And we covered a couple of things on that. Today, we're going to talk about that first variable, that sales variable. So we're going to talk about management of emotions. Now, how do you, by the way, let's make a really clear point here. Like, how do you manage other people's emotions? This is just like a technical sales advice. Some of you guys want some more technical sales training, which we'll definitely get into in leads. But on a technical point, how do you manage somebody's emotions? Really simple. You just tell them what's going to happen before it happens, right? If you tell somebody what's going to happen before it happens, when it happens, it won't be so bad. Does that make sense? Like, obviously, right? If you don't tell somebody what happens, like I work with, our computer guys, and sometimes they'll say what's going to happen. I don't believe them. I'm like, I don't think that's going to happen, guys. And they're like, it's going to happen. Then it doesn't happen. Then they tell me excuses. I'm like, well, if you just told me that was going to happen, I'd been more, so that kind of idea. So likewise, let me just make another point, because Lee made a very excellent joke at my expense last call. I was like, Lee's resign. And Lee's like, ha, ha, ha. I'm like, Lee, I'm serious. I was really serious. Look, just got to cover this point. Let's talk about alterations just for a second here. If you're complaining that you can be liable for having a lot of alterations that are in excess of what we deem reasonable, more than reasonable as a company, the reality is, if you're a police officer and you mishandle your weapon, you are liable, right? If you're a doctor and you conduct gross negligence, you are liable, right? Every profession has a series of liabilities that if you misconduct yourself in a professional manner, as expected up to the standard of the organization of the profession, you're liable for something. In our case, you're like, oh man, I'm out $36, on a month where I made $6,000, 36, like, yes, there has to be the professional liabilities included in every profession, because otherwise then people have no compass to guide their contact. Your intentions, as good as they might be, are not good enough. But my intentions are so good. Try that next time you have to pay your mortgage. It doesn't work. Now that we've got, kind of a little emotional management out of the way, let's talk about managing your emotions. So managing your emotions, if you guys are taking notes, here's a couple things. Number one, managing your emotions is not the same thing as eliminating your emotions. Emotions, going back to our theme of physics from Lee's call, emotions are kind of like energy. They can't really be created or destroyed. Like, all the emotions you have in you, like, are pre-programmed, right? Like, believe me, I got young kids, like, whether it's like sadness or anger or joy, they're very much pre-programmed responses in the human psyche. They already are there. You know what I mean? We can evoke those emotions with various actions. We cannot create or destroy them. What that also means, like energy, we can replace emotions with other emotions, right? We can replace emotions with other emotions. I'll take you guys through it. So one emotion that I often feel is frustration. I am a frustrated dude. I think fast. I like to get things done. I usually know the answer of things before they happen, and probably I know the end of most sentences before they're said. It's a terrible way to live, but it is how it is, and so I get frustrated easily. So I have this emotion of frustration, right? I cannot eliminate it. However, I can choose to focus that emotion into a different emotion. Here's an example. Let's say you're on the phone and you got 8 people in a row shut you down, just hang up the phone on you. You will probably feel a little frustrated, right? Yes, you will. Now, you can handle that frustration in a variety of ways. You can say, our sales script doesn't work. That's one way to handle your emotions, right? You can say, oh, the sales script doesn't work. You can say, oh, these leads are just sucky leads, bad leads. You can choose to channel your frustration in that direction. You can make that choice, right? Or you can say, you know what, I'm going to hammer out 20 more contacts because I'm sure there's people in here that want my service right now, right? So how you choose to channel your emotion directly impacts the outcome of your, I don't want to say of your day, although that's true, really of your life, right? Because you can channel your emotions and you can transliterate your emotions into a positive outcome or a more negative outcome. Does that make sense? And the way you look at it is really simple. If you're channeling your emotions towards a positive outcome, it means you're channeling your emotions towards action. Anytime you channel your emotion towards action, you are producing a positive outcome. assuming that you have aligned your action with what you want, right? And if you don't channel your emotion towards action, you are generally channeling your emotion towards helplessness. Or another way to say it is lack of accountability. Right? I'll tell you guys, so when I was in university, I had the privilege of seeing Howard Schultz speak at our school. And Howard Schultz is, of course, the founder of Starbucks. He came to my school, and I was really happy to see Howard Schultz. And he went up on stage, and he started talking about, building a global brand. I found it very inspirational, got his book and all that. And Howard Schultz said, neutral is negative in business. He said, neutral is negative. And I wrote that down. I was like, neutral is negative. I didn't really know what it meant, but I was like, neutral is negative. He kind of explained, like, in business, there's no neutral. Either you're growing or you're dead. Coming from the CEO of one of the most successful companies of all time, I was like, I better write that down. I got third year university. I don't know what that means. I'm like, let's write it down. Neutral is negative, right? A few weeks later, I'm at a sales seminar, and the speaker says, neutral is negative. And I was like, hey, the universe is trying to tell me something here, right? And what the speaker expressed was, the speaker was talking about your attitude. And she said that if your attitude is neutral, if you're not actively controlling your emotions, you're being negative. So she didn't say that positive is positive and negative is negative. She just said neutral is negative. So she said, anytime you're not in control and actively managing your emotions, you're being negative. And I was like, whoa, that's a pretty hard thing to, to admit to myself. And, Howard Schultz said the same thing, neutral is negative, right? So if you use your frustration, so what can you do with your frustration? You can say, you know what, I'm not getting the results I want. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to improve myself technically. I'm going to make more contacts. I'm going to take action. I'm going to take action right now to improve my results and use my frustration as a channel of movement, as a channel of intent, and as a channel of action. And if I don't do that, what am I doing? Well, probably that energy can't be destroyed, right? Frustration cannot be destroyed. It has to go somewhere, right? So I'm going to call Tonu and just complain, hey, man, I think our leads really suck, Tonu. And Tonu's going to be like, yeah, man, I'm feeling pretty frustrated too. And I'm glad you called me because I wasn't sure what to do with that frustration, but now that I have an outlet, I'll really let it rip, like, and then it creates a cycle of failure. What it does, it creates a cycle of failure. So if you're not actively managing your emotions by changing that emotion into action, you're being negative. Now, I've said this many times before. There will be a lot of repetition on this call, but I generally see two different reactions from salespeople. I see how do people handle frustration. There's two things, right? Frustration generally gets handled either with action or with blame. That's it. Action or blame. That there's only two answers, action or blame, because that energy has to go somewhere, right? Now, blame can be blaming yourself. I'm not good enough. I'm not talented enough. I'm not skilled enough. I don't have what it takes, right? Blame can be directed at your market. Client sucks, city sucks, whatever. Blame can be directed at your company. Company's unfair, company's cruel. Whatever, right? And that's where blame. So you either blame your market, your company, or yourself. And I find it's usually pretty equally divided between the three, right? And then we find, and by the way, do you ever notice how preposterous our frustration, when our frustration turns into blame, which is when it's not being actioned, do you guys notice how, if you're in sales management, I was telling somebody yesterday, like, if you guys ever want to, if I ever want to punish my enemies, like if I want to just ironically punish my enemies and just watch them suffer, I will make them the CEO of a company for like one day. Like that is like, and I used to say this as a sales manager. I'm like, if I ever want to punish one of my salespeople, I'll make him a sales manager. Like that's why? Because then they'll see what it's really like. You know what I mean? Because the amount of preposterous blaming excuses you hear is just, by the way, you guys know this already. And Mamik is nodding because now he's training people. He's like, oh my God, I didn't know this before. But you guys know this from clients, right? If you ever want to punish your enemies, you're going to put them in sales for a day, aren't you? So they can hear all those real, totally true excuses your clients give you. Oh, I forgot my wallet. I'm losing weight. I need to talk to my wife. It's like, dude, you can't afford it. Just say it. It's cool. Like you don't need 80 words to describe I can't afford this. Like that's 4 words, right? Pretty simple. And then when you go up the chain, what you get is more creative excuses and you get more elaborate excuses, but you still get excuses. And ultimately what happens is it's frustration channels something else. So there's 2 ways people handle frustration. Now, when I was in the field, I remember I would get so freaking frustrated when I didn't get a sale because I'm, like you guys, very sales driven. Like I would just run all day. Like I was selling door to door. I would just run between the houses all day. Like I would literally lose 50, 55 pounds every summer just from running all day. Like I would sprint because like, and this is true. And people that follow me knew, they're like, what the hell's going on? Like, I'm just so mad. I need a sale. Like I need to, I can't blame my territory. I can't blame the weather. I can't blame anybody. I got doors. I can knock them. Let's go. And when I observed other top producers, this is what top producers did. They took responsibility and they channeled their frustration into action. Now, every company and organization is split into three categories: the top 20%, the middle 60%, and the bottom 20%. You guys get that? It's the Pareto principle, 80-20 rule, right? And it has to be the fact, like somebody has to be in the top 20%, right? Like right now, if you're in the top 20% of our company, like sales-wise, if you're selling about 45 to 50, you're sort of in the top 20%, right? If you're selling sort of like between like 30 to 45, you're kind of in that middle 60%. And if you're like under 25, you're probably in the bottom 20. Like that's just how things are shaking out right now. You know what I mean? That's kind of where things are. We got some great people that are, businesses built. It's great. And what I noticed is people that are in the middle or at the bottom tend to make frustration into blame. And people are like, I'll say that's the true story. I had some people in the past, one person in particular, I won't name, but years ago, really complaining about like, you don't invest enough time in me, Chenda gets all your attention, Dimi, And I couldn't explain to this person that I haven't talked to Chenda in like 2 months. Like people are like, oh, you must talk to Chenda every day. I probably talk to Chenda right about never. Like he might write to me like once every other month, like checking in, say hi. That's it. You guys know how often I talk to Jurgen? Like never. Like he was in town one day last month and I think we might have grabbed lunch or we just chatted for a minute. You don't hear from top producers. You never hear from them. You know what I mean? And by the way, you guys ever notice this with your clients, with your Venice and Milan clients? You just like, if something is like a day, whatever, like a small alteration, you fix it, it's completely fine, right? There's just no issues, right? And then the bottom 20%, the ones that think they're not getting attention, they're constantly complaining, right? Think white label client, am I right? Like your white label, like I got my, 2 shirts and I feel like the buttons are too round. Like I don't like that much symmetry, like just some stupid stuff. Can you lengthen the sleeve 1/4 inch, please? Like really? But it's a fact, right? And it's the same with us as people. So us, if you think of yourself as a client or an employee to your company, you're like, I'm a great employee. Well, sure. And I kind of check the complaint meter and I go, well, maybe not so much, because the top 20% of clients, they just don't complain. They're just your A+ clients. And we all want those, right? But naturally, we know our business spreads out the way it does because it has to, right? And so top producers, the top 20%, I never hear from them. I love to reach out to them. We love to talk, and it's great. I just don't hear from them because they turn their frustration into action. Like I never have Jurgen calling me complaining about his leads. It's never happened once. I've never once had Chenda complain to me that nobody's picking up the phone, ever. In the 6-7 years, whatever we worked together, he's 6 years, never called me like, oh, these leads suck because the numbers are wrong. Never happens. Still goes out, sells 80K a month. Never happens, right? Never happens. People that aren't doing so well, well, it's not fair, the market. It's like, well, so think about that. Think about what you're translating your emotions into. Now, I said this last time, and again, I'll repeat it again. You can act your way into healthy thinking way easier than you can think your way into healthy acting. You can act your way into healthy thinking way easier than you can think your way into healthy acting. Think about it this way. The most important thing here is that you can yourself heavily influence your own emotions and frustrations, heavily, right? And you will either create a positive or a negative feedback loop. You take your frustration and you go puke on one of your coworkers, right? Now your coworker smells bad too, and then you're like now creating that cycle of frustration internally, and you're creating your own problems. Or you say, I'm going to take action about this and I'm going to improve, and you create a positive feedback loop where now you're sending the message to the universe that your frustration just turns into a catalyst for action. What a powerful thing to consider. When your frustration turns into a catalyst for action, or your sadness and self-pity turns into a catalyst for change. Whoa, that is some powerful stuff. Now, Will James, and some of you guys have heard this quote many times, but William James, and by the way, if you like biographies or just learning about people, William James is very interesting. It's kind of your classic, like, I don't think my kid is ever going to be normal, to becomes one of the greatest psychologists of all times at Harvard. That's William James, right? And Will James, as a very renowned Harvard psychologist, has this quote, and it goes that the greatest discovery of our generation is that human beings can alter their life by altering their attitude. That is huge. Human being can alter his life by altering his attitude. We talk about attitude a lot. When you're on the phone today, when you're with clients today, where's your attitude at? So remember how I said, Howard Schultz said neutral is negative? Is your mind neutral right now? And if it is, it's negative. We're going to talk about how to make sure that it's not neutral, because if it's neutral, it's negative. If you're not in control of your thoughts, they are definitely controlling you. So the greatest discovery of our generation is that a human being can change his life by altering his attitude. William James. So let's talk about influencing your emotions. And the reason we're going to talk about influencing your emotions, I have a couple points here, is that I wanted to underline how infinitely important it is, A, that you influence your emotions actively, and B, that you realize what you're turning your emotions into. Are you turning emotions into frustration and to blame? Or are you turning emotion into action and results? And it makes a very big difference in your life, right? And by the way, I kind of love it. Like when I used to be in the book business, and you guys from the book business, you remember this back in the day when like somebody would go out and like perform very mediocrely, but in their mind, they were now an expert of sales because they went out and mediocrely knocked on doors for a few months. Like now I'm and then they go out into real life and they're like, I'm going to go to IBM and teach those guys and get the sweet job and stuff. And then they get out to the marketplace and they get crushed very quickly and they come back all depressed. Like, what happened? Well, it turns out that it wasn't, the field that was wrong. It was, now they have to compete with, other people that are after what they're after. And these other people know everything that these guys think they know and act on it and put it in place. You know what I mean? And when you start looking at it that way, you kind of realize that like your success and your income is actually, as a salesperson, very much industry independent. Like there's a lot of realtors that make a fortune and there's a lot more broke ass realtors, you know what I mean? And it's the same in any sort of a sales environment. It's not really relevant what specifically you're selling. It's all these principles and skills that completely apply, right? And the bigger the prize, the more the competition, so the higher level you have to be. So that's just the reality of competing markets in life. So it is therefore profoundly important that you learn to influence your emotions, because it very highly correlates with your value in the marketplace, regardless of what you're selling. It just is. Number one, and again, so I'm going to go through 5 points here. Number one, I've covered this a million times. I'm going to cover it again. Your physical environment or your physical space greatly influences your emotional state. Your physical environment, meaning that, and again, I've talked about this before, and I still see a lot of people do this, and a lot of people don't, so if you don't, you should. Does your workstation clearly display your goals? Like, what are your professional, personal goals? Do you have pictures of things that inspire you to be better? Now, one thing that I've started to do is so I'm working at my own like home office today because I was kind of sick this morning, but I got a world map here, and on the world map I have pins of all the places LGFG is going, and it inspires me to think like, wow, look at all the places we're going. You know what I mean? Amongst other things. But in the office that I'm in, if you guys are sitting in the boardroom right now, you'll see on the desk there's all these things printed out that are framed, all these certificates right on my desk. TISA, TONU, MB, you guys should see it right where I normally sit. And what those are, whenever we like do an event and we donate like clothing to a charity, nonprofit, we get this nice letter. They're like, thank you for participating. We raised $160,000. Your guys, contribution was really meaningful, yada, yada. And then I get Lillian to print those and put them in frames. And so now in my office, on my desk, whenever I'm working, kind of in my peripheral vision, are all these thank you certificates from all these charities we raise money for. Now, I'm not driving to work every day like, okay, like who am I going to raise money for today? Because that's not the core of my job, right? Like I have a different core to in the business. But that in itself, being around me, motivates me subconsciously, because a couple of times a day I'm like, oh, cool. We do these great events, and it really helps the people in the company, and it really helps the event itself. Like, that makes me feel good. It's just a very subconscious peripheral thing. In the Calgary office, same thing. I got my map on the background there with the little pins of where our offices are, and I find that like hugely inspirational. And when I'm making calls or when I'm talking to somebody on the phone, I'm usually writing myself positive notes, which I'll talk about in a second. But really, really important is your physical environment. Are your goals? I love it when people like that float put their cards up like on the wall of the people they floated, and then they have like a wall. Like, I love that because it reinforces the great people you got to meet. And like, so those things, and it's not like a one-time thing, but those things are hugely important. So if you're not controlling your physical space, start taking ownership of your physical space. You should be surrounded by inspiration. For me, when I carry my fabrics folder on the front, I would actually tape my goals. Like, I would actually put like how much I want to sell this month, how many clients I need, so that anytime I go in with my fabrics folder, I would have my goals in front of me. That's really, really important. And, Edgar knows that because we used to do that back in the book biz as well. And I remember one time, true story, I was sitting down with a realtor on the Bridle Path in Toronto. And the Bridle Path, for you guys that don't know, is the richest street in North America. So I went to like the house of the artist at the time, formerly known as Prince. Now he's currently known as dead. And for a while there, he was just Prince. And so I was sitting down with this lady realtor who was a single mom, and she was telling me this really funny story about her nanny went to get her Starbucks and left her car running, and somebody jumped in the car and drove away in her Mercedes. And she's like, well, I don't have a car today, so might as well come in, show me these things you're selling, And she looked down at my notepad where I was taking notes of all the houses and like what time I could go there to like knock on their door. And she noticed that I had a lot of check marks on my page. And she goes, what does a check mark mean? I mean, it means the house is done. I'm not going there anymore. She goes, why don't you X it out? I said, I don't like looking at X's all day. It makes me feel like I got some wrong answers on a test. I like check marks. And she goes, what you're doing is more powerful than you know. That's what she told me. She was right. So your physical space, what are you looking at all day? Really important. I've said it a million times. I'm saying it again. Number two, this one is really, really fundamental to you, especially if you're like sort of in the bottom 20%, like if the numbers I gave, you're kind of like, oh my goodness, I'm not in the top 20%. If you want to get out of the bottom 20%, this is probably your number one, and that's your circle of influence, specifically the people that you choose to work with. This is really important. I'm talking about work, so the people that you choose to communicate with about your work is the most fundamentally important thing to your success at work. To say it very succinctly, millionaires talk to millionaires. Millionaires talk to millionaires. Okay? It's kind of like for me, I got a big old Facebook wall with lots of people, and some of them are like socialists, and I'm like, I'm going to unfollow you because I don't want to see your stupid socialist posts because that deters me from achieving my goals. I do not want you to influence me. I'm not being closed-minded. I'm just very serious about my goals. Very serious about my goals. Infinitely, life-changingly serious about my goals. So who are you letting influence you? Like, as an example, if you want to find out, when you're talking to somebody about your goals or anything at all that's going on around you professionally, what's bouncing back at you? What's bouncing back at you? And I had a conversation, I can't remember who it was with, but it might have been, maybe it was even Andrew, and I don't want me to put you on the spot. I can't remember somebody, and I was talking to somebody, and maybe it wasn't you, Andrew, so I'll just say it wasn't whatever. I was talking to somebody that had been talking to somebody that had been in our company, and then I had politely asked them, this was some time ago, this is going back 2-3 years, but I politely asked this person to leave, like as politely as I could at the time when that was what I was doing. I said, politely, you have to go. And I can't remember if it was Andrew or somebody else, but I can't remember months. No, Andrew's like, not me, I'm not. But anyways, sorry, man, it wasn't Andrew. But whoever, they were talking to this person that had left like months ago, and they were telling me like, oh, this person said something about, how we run things. I'm like, why are you talking to that person, man? And they're like, well, they used to work here. I'm like, sure. But like anybody that was politely asked to leave, they're not going to be like, man, I really love that fucking leader, Dimitry. They're not going to say that. They're going to just destroy the leadership, right? Because they were politely asked to leave. They were kicked out of a group. They're not going to be big fans, They're not my fans. Reality strikes, it is what it is. And so, again, this was one of those personal choices I had to make, but I'm going to talk to people that are going to help me achieve my goals. Fuck, I pay money to a guy. I talk about this all the time. I pay money to a guy because he validates my ideas and helps me grow to become more of what my goals want, what I want for my goals, right? And by the way, do you guys not think that like every person, and I'm not putting myself into this category today yet, but don't you think every person that's remarkably successful is probably pretty fucking intentional about it? Do you know what I mean? Michael Jordan isn't like, oh, I'm really good at basketball. You know, like that's just happened, man. You know, I don't know. Didn't have to practice, came out there, scored 50 points and just became, you know, that's not how it works, right? They define very concrete goals, very specific targets, very, very real, tangible things, and they chase those things, and they make conscious decisions to achieve those things, right? And so your circle of influence, I am profoundly, profoundly protective over whom I let influence my mind. Again, does it mean I'm closed-minded? Yeah, definitely. But what it really means is I'm really fucking committed to my goals. That's what it is. Like I have my goals, I'm really committed to them, and I'm going to surround myself with people that are likewise committed to those goals because, and does it work? Well, yeah, like it works. Like I would say that, the conversation I just had briefly with Eustace there about how, we have a trip to Dubai next week and I'm like really struggling because I don't want to go to Dubai. We're like, oh, there's an event in Dubai and the head of Newsweek like invites me to go there. And I'm like, but I got a hockey practice. Like I like hockey practice, And I said, listen, I defined some very clear goals 10 years ago. I defined some very clear goals 5 years ago. I'm defining some very clear goals now. If you told me 5 years ago that I had an opportunity to go to Dubai to hang out with the owners of Newsweek and be at a big corporate event in Dubai, and I was like, I don't really want to go because I just don't feel like being on a flight this month and I want to go to hockey practice, I would have not believed that I would have said that. But that is truly how I feel. That is a good problem. The point is that doing it works. Whatever it is, it works. So if you are letting agents of mediocrity or agents of negativity or agents of gossip or frustration influence you, get away. Like create barriers, create emotional walls against that. Because if you're being influenced by agents of mediocrity or agents of negativity, that's all good. It'll validate your frustrations. It'll make you feel good about your frustrations, that you're not alone in sucking or in hating or being frustrated. But it certainly doesn't align you with the Chendas and Jurgens of this company. Because I guarantee you the Chendas and Jurgens of this company, they're talking to each other, they're not talking to agents of frustration. You know what I mean? And I can validate this because the other day I had a call with the Hong Kong office and Chenda, and I stayed on the call right after. And the first thing Chenda said to me, he goes, Dimi, I've been talking to Jurgen, and I'm like, interesting. Jurgen sells 100K, and what does Chenda do? He calls him. Not surprising, but interesting, right? But interesting. So think about that. In the Grant Cardone example from last call, we called that the wolf pack, right? And how he said, if I can just get you out of the wolf pack, I'm already increasing your results 30%. Number 3 is your physical state. Are you anchoring yourself into a winning state? What I mean is, this is a very momentary thing I wanted to throw in there. Of course, I could throw in a million things. I threw in like 5 or 6. But if you are sitting on the phone all day and you're having a sucky day, this one's really simple. Just stand up and make your call standing up. Just, if something's not right about your day, this is, again, kind of a momentary thing thrown into a whole kind of a grander picture thing, so it's a little bit of a contradiction there. But if you are not having the time that you should be having and you're not feeling it, just change your physical state. Are you in charge of your physical state? Are you sitting, leaning back and scrunched up in your chair? Like, or if you need to get the boost of positivity and the boost of positive influence towards yourself, change your physical state. Number 4, this one's really big, is your schedule. It's your schedule. And it's not just your schedule at work, it's your life schedule. This one's really important. Your schedule really has a profound influence on your emotional state. Huge. Are you waking up on time every day and going to bed on? Like, I remember a couple of years ago, I was talking to a guy, and he was a cool guy, and he was kind of saying, like, man, I'm so tired all the time, and yet, I'm waking up early, I'm going to bed on time, like, I got my schedule, I'm so tired. I'm like, really? You didn't get any sleep? You're like, well, no, I'm getting my sleep, everything is good, but like, well, what'd you do on the weekend? He's like, I DJ'd a party until 3 a.m. on Saturday. I'm like, well, okay, so your schedule is not like your 9 to 5 schedule, it's your life schedule. Like, are you getting out and getting exercise when you're supposed to? Are you sleeping right? Are you eating right? Not just during the week, but on weekends too. Like, if you're partying till 3 a.m. on a Saturday, why are you surprised that you're tired on Monday? Like, you should, like, duh, right? And professionals keep like, I'll give you guys an example. Some of our best friends in Calgary, it's a couple that me and Trino hang out with, and they got 2 kids about the same age as ours. And these guys are both emergency room doctors, and they're like some of our best friends in Calgary, right? Really cool couple. Like they're a little older, like probably 2-3 years older than us, but they're both ER doctors, right? And what's interesting is like we want to hang out and like we coordinate schedules, but like we know that their schedule is really freaking tight, right? Like when they're supposed to be in ER, like they're not checking Facebook at work, you know what I mean? Like they're pulling nails out of some guy's foot if they're lucky. So like, and then they're on call as well. And when they're on call, you know, and Trina's parents are also doctors, and when they're on call, they're not going out to the bar drinking when they're on call. They're like so fiercely protective of their schedule. You know what I mean? Because their job carries a high level of responsibility. Like if they scrub, they can kill somebody. And you're like going to work like super tired and you mismeasure somebody like, oh, I measured a sleeve wrong and now I don't want to pay for the alteration. Well, you know, the failure happened much before that alteration, didn't it? You know, your schedule might have been a big contributing factor to that because you weren't in the right frame of mind, because, you know, you were not being entirely, let's say, honest with your schedule. That's one thing. So your schedule is incredibly important to controlling your emotional state, meaning ultimately you have to control the controllables, and not just at work. It's your exercise, it's your eating, it's all those things. And again, I bring it up. I know that most people just hear it and go, that's a good idea, and then move on. But if you can just action one of these things, you'll immediately improve your results. And if there's a failure at any of them, take note. Number five, and the last one, really important, is kind of related to the other ones, is what are you feeding to your brain? What are you feeding to your brain? On this one, really, really simple and straightforward. It's that, so you guys watch, I'll say this something that you already know, but you'll still find it surprising, okay? Oprah Winfrey has a book club. You guys know that, right? Yeah, Oprah Winfrey's book, everybody knows that. Elon Musk has a list of his favorite books that he puts out. You probably already knew that. You're like, oh yeah, Elon Musk, that's a great book, right? Bill Gates has a book club, right? Where he lists the top most influential, that's interesting. Warren Buffett lists all the influential books that he reads. You know, Richard Branson, so I can keep going. You already knew this, but when you combine all the information together, you kind of go, hey, that's interesting. Like all the world's billionaires seem to have a freaking book club, right? Like I said, you already knew this, but you just realized it, right? You're like, huh, that's interesting. It's also not terribly surprising, but now that you think about it, if you wanted to read a list of books Bill Gates recommends, you can find it within about 2 seconds. Same with Elon Musk, right? It was the same with Steve Jobs. It's the same with any of them. So take a note, take a hint. You know, if you put crappy food into your body, you're going to probably get a crappy body, at least after 25. So what you're feeding your body has a profound influence on the way that your body responds. What you're feeding your mind, likewise, has a very profound influence on what your brain does. And there's proof. Here's a couple of books, wink, wink. I've recommended these before. The Brain That Changes Itself is a great one. The Plastic Brain, and Psycho-Cybernetics. And of course, and the Shad Helmstetter book as well. What to Say When You're Speaking to Yourself. It's another one and that's on a similar topic. But if you look at like The Brain That Changes Itself, Psycho-Cybernetics, or The Plastic Brain, all those books say the same thing. Not only does your brain emotionally change when you feed it different types of information, your brain physically changes, right? That's a scary thought. Like when you think negative thoughts, the neural pathways in your brain that are responsible for transmitting negativity become more powerful with the dark side of the force. December 15th, right? So your brain, like you're actually, by thinking negative thoughts, you're physically transforming your brain, and scientists can see that like on your physical brain. Like if you saw your body, you know somebody's not treating it well, but if you look at the brain, you can literally physically see that it changes with the thoughts people think. The plastic brain that changes itself, literally changes physically itself, right? And so when you're feeding your brain crappy information, excuses, blame, you know, agents of mediocrity and all that stuff, not only does your emotional state change, but over time, your physical brain becomes, you guys know somebody in your life that's like super negative, you almost have to avoid them? Like, you just have to avoid them because they're so fucking negative. You're like, I'm just going to avoid this person. I just can't deal with them. Like, the whole embodiment of what they are in your life is just like a cloud of negativity. Like, you're like, I'm going to avoid that person because they're kind of negative. And you all know somebody like that. You're like, oh my God, I know somebody like that, right? Like, if you could see their brain, like the physical condition of their brain has already come to the point that that's just their brain. That's the muscle they've developed, right? Like no legs day, just negative brain day. All right. So that's a thing. And so what are you feeding your brain? So again, are you reading books that help you and your brain condition itself the right way? Are you intentionally feeding positive information into your thoughts in order to physically change your brain? Are you? So think about that. So there you guys have it, influencing your emotions and managing your emotions. It's not eliminating emotions. It's about changing your emotions into either intentional positive action, or that emotion transliterates and changes into something else. Usually it's something negative, because neutral is negative, as Howard Schultz said, right? You can act your way into healthy thinking. Will James covered the greatest discovery of the generation. And influencing your emotions, your physical environment, your circle of influence, your physical state, your schedule, and what you feed your brain. Hopefully there's something to think about. I hope you guys can just see one thing on there and just say that one thing is lacking for me. You just realize that you need to change and you just change it. All right? I just hope you apply one of those things today. Wishing you guys a great day and see you Friday. Cheerios!